Hello and welcome to episode 427 of Retro Encounter, RPG fans' weekly podcast of many topics. I'm Mike Sollosi. And ladies, gentlemen, and non-binary friends, we all have played Dark Souls, maybe for the first time, maybe for the fourth time. It doesn't matter. The game is behind us, and now we are going to talk about everything in the second half of Dark Souls that we care to within a reasonable time frame, including story, lore, boss fights, disappointments, what have you. But who's joining me on this journey? The same group as last week. They are Aleks Franiczek.
Hello.
Ben Love.
Hey.
Dom Kim.
Hello.
And Gio Castillo.
Hello.
Gio, Dom, Ben, Aleks. Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned this in the previous episode, but I started this game early into anticipation that maybe I would really struggle through it to before we had to record the podcast in time. But I had so much fun that I knocked it out in a couple of weeks and finished it like almost a month ago, because I mean, this game is just really, really good and gets more compelling the deeper you get in. And I'm sure I communicated some of that enthusiasm last week, but yeah, I'm excited to talk about the end game. Where we cut off last time was at the top of Anor Londo, after the rather notorious Ornstein and Smaug fight. You meet Lady is it Guinevere? Yeah, okay. You meet Lady Guinevere, a big shiny goddess with and some impressive a very statuesque goddess, let's say, at the top of Anor Londo, and she gives you the Lord Vessel, which is a which is some kind of like urn or maybe a bowl that's specifically for collecting Lord souls. And to reach the first flame and discover your destiny, you need to fill that Lord Vessel with three Lord souls. And scattered throughout the game are 4 bosses that have either that Lord Soul that you need or a fragment of a Lord Soul. The story sort of explains why those are those circumstances. And the second half of Dark Souls is getting to those 4 bosses and then using the Lord Vessel to challenge the final boss. But more importantly, the Lord Vessel also acts as your fast travel device. And now I don't think you can go to every bonfire in the game, but something like 2/3 of them become fast travel hubs for you once you have the Lord Vessel. But did we talk about the Firekeeper at Firelink Shrine last week?
Did.
Yeah, we did. Yeah, I think after you ring the second bell, she disappears, and in Anor Londo you can challenge that who's that jerk that brings 2 friends with him?
Lautrec.
Yeah, Lautrec. That's right. Yeah, good old Toulouse-Lautrec. The what was he, like a turn of the century mural artist or something. You can fight Lautrec to get that Firekeeper soul back. But the Firelink Shrine isn't a fast travel point on your Lord Vessel unless you return that Firekeeper soul to the shrine. And I want to talk about Firekeeper souls later, but in a way, this is when this point of the game is where Dark Souls opens up. But also I think this is where Dark Souls gets a little less interesting, just because I think the second half environments aren't quite as well plotted or paced as the first half environments, and that's not an original thought. I mean, I've seen that kind of sentiment pop around everywhere, including from the 4 of you off air. But without getting into ultra specifics, what are our feelings on this sort of second part of the game?
Yeah, so we spent a lot of time talking last time about like the interconnectedness of the world, and this second half of the game kind of loses a lot of that.
Yeah,
and I think
they basically 4 golden doors that sealed off parts of the world to you are now gone, so you can explore at like 4 specific places a little bit more deeply now. But otherwise, I mean, it's a little bit more retreading and revisiting, and less discovery, less feeling the interconnectedness.
Yeah, and these areas are also just more like straightforward, I would say, like just a little more linear, and and all that, which kind of makes sense because they're kind of the endpoints of each respective branch that's kind of off of Firelink Shrine, but you're just not getting that kind of things wrapping in around on themselves as much as you were at the beginning of the game.
Yeah, I mean, Lost Ezelith and the Tomb of the Giants are basically two very very low points coming off of Firelink. And the Duke's Archive, I mean, if you think of Anor Londo as just being far, far above Firelink, that's just kind of going up, isn't it? And then the new Londo ruins are sort of like directly below, without stretching as far away as Lost Ezelith or Tomb of the Giants. But generally, I agree. These are less interesting areas than before, and most of them have gimmicks that I just find annoying. I'm sure all of us have tripped and fallen to one of those like one of those on fours skeleton giants in the Tomb of the Giants and fallen off a ledge before.
Yeah, that and then there's the invisible sections in the I think it's in the Crystal Cave.
Yeah, the Crystal Cave. Yeah, you have to watch and see where the raindrops are falling to find out where the invisible bridges are. And I know that made me think of that one scene from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade a little bit, but yeah, that was a little annoying too. And the boss fights are, I mean, they're not bad, but I feel like all of them, like, well, okay, one of them's bad, but none of them are as cool or satisfying as Ornstein and Smough, or even like the bell tower gargoyles. But I mean, I don't want to sound like the second half's a downer. Like, it's still good. I definitely liked fighting these bosses and getting stronger and getting to the end game. It's just not as powerfully like cool as the first half. Dom, what's your memory of the second half of Dark Souls 1 like?
I mean, it's pretty much as you described here. It's like for me at least, I can, after Ornstein and Smough, there's like a definite cutoff point, I feel, where FromSoft just weren't able to get enough iterations on the levels, or just ran out of time to finish the levels, because like just going from how beautifully laid out Anor Londo is to then going to Lost Izalith, where there are like the dragon butt enemies just like scattered around everywhere, or even the demon ruins before it, where there are just like, I don't know, like 20 Taurus demons just standing in lava.
Yeah, there's a corridor full of Taurus demons and a corridor full of Capra demons. Yeah. And it almost feels like you have to pick your poison. Then you realize, oh, there's sort of a way they intend for you to go that avoids most of them. But I mean, it's not my favorite fire dungeon, let me tell you.
Yeah, it's like I mean, it was still fun they were still like visually interesting, at least. Like Lost Izalith, especially. Also recently, I looked through Lost Izalith using like a no-clip tool in like just like on the internet, and like the layout and like the visuals of the map itself are like really interesting and well made. It's just, I feel they weren't able to get gameplay passes on it to really make it interesting to play, and I feel that's also really reflective on the boss fight at the end of Lost Izalith as well.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard of this boss before playing the game, because people would be like, "Oh man, Ornstein and Smough are great, but Bed of Chaos is the worst boss in the whole series." It's like, I mean, Lost Ezelith is sort of it. In case the listeners are unaware or have forgotten, the Demon Ruins are sort of a big fiery zone. Lost Ezelith is a slightly more like still a big fiery zone that's also kind of a bit of a wasteland. Like it's fallen into more disrepair and a state of dereliction. But the end Bed of Chaos is basically, it's sort of just a like a fiery cage that where you have to destroy 3 sort of lights on it to shut it down. So there's not it's not an opponent that we with a sensible health bar. You just sort of have to get to each of the 3 points while the ground is collapsing around you. They're lashing at you with giant tendrils or roots or something, making things fall from the ceiling. It's very, very easy to lose your balance and fall and die instantly. And the walk back to Lost Ezelith is a giant pain in the ass, even if you unlock the shortcut back to Blighttown. So it took me a couple attempts for the bed of chaos, but and the hardest part was to figure out that for the third light you have to drop down onto a bridge into one of the holes instead of leaping across or finding a path along the side, which I tried a couple times before figuring it out. I mean,
Mhm.
is the bed of chaos as bad for everyone else? Because it's like it's different from every fight in the game, but not in a fun way.
Yeah, I mean it's extremely tedious. Like it starts off like a joke. Like you're just like walking and you're like, oh okay, I guess I like go to either the left or right side and I just like break this thing. And then like the ground starts crumbling and you're like, oh, this is kind of annoying. And if you're running, which if you're doing it for the first time, you're like, why wouldn't I run? You can like easily just run into like a pit as it's crumbling beneath your feet, and then suddenly that's a restart, and then that can just like keep happening, and then like the stupid tree root thing just starts swiping at you. You have to make that horrible jump onto that
Mhm.
trunk bridge you mentioned, and then you finally get to the end and just like okay, and you walk down like this little path and it's just like this stupid bug, and you one shot it and then the fight's over. It's it's an interesting design, but it's definitely not fun to play.
I mean, I saw a lot of chatter when I was going through a Dark Souls hyper research phase. That is one of the worst bosses in the series, and I see no reason to deny that.
Yeah, I think one of the most apt descriptions I've seen is they put a Mario boss with Dark Souls controls, and that's what the Bed of Chaos is. And I kind of agree. You like Dark Souls still it's still in the phase where you have to like sprint and then click the left stick to jump, and like you have to do like platforming segments and avoid holes that you have no idea are going to appear when you do it for the first time. And it's just a hot mess, really. It's learning through repetition in like the worst way possible because you're just forced to fail until you just can see the patterns or just know where the holes are going to appear or how the arms are going to sweep across the arena. Like there's no way for you to, I think, to realistically beat the boss in one go, just using the cues that the boss gives you during the fight.
Yeah, I've never met a single player who was just like, "Oh no, yeah, I figured it out. Like it was easy."
Yeah.
Like no, everybody just gets surprised and frustrated and annoyed. So that's why it has such a terrible reputation.
I mean, rather than a Mario boss, because there's the glowing weak points that you have to hit, it reminds me more like a Shadow of the Colossus boss, but worse than every single Shadow of the Colossus boss.
Mm.
It's like you like run from weak point to weak point, and the ending is underwhelming. It's a little sort of firefly looking bug behind the cage that drops the Lord Soul. And I'd like to take a break from talking about boss battles to get into story stuff a little bit. The lore that's, or not even the lore, the opening cutscene of the game talks about how this land Lordran is named after the lords that liberated the land from a civilization of dragons, and each one of those four had a powerful lord soul that gave them immortality and great power. And uh, the way that this game does storytelling is well documented, and it's very very cool when they pull it off well, and FromSoft often does. But you don't like you kind of play this game as a meathead knight, just going from place to place and defeating bosses and ringing bells and collecting souls, and not really pay attention to what you're doing. But if you do things like take the souls from enemies as you from the bosses, make weapons with them by going to Andre or the Giant. Oh, Andre the Giant.
Mhm.
Neither of them is Andre the Giant. Um, and read the weapon descriptions and just take in all of the uh, minimalist storytelling that they give you, lets you sort of realize what happened before, and that you're sort of navigating this ruined world that was once prosperous but is now in like the late stages of its life. And I mean, we talked about that a little bit last time, but the point I wanted to make was Quelag, the boss at the end of Blight Town, is a fiery lady with the lower half of a spider. And oh boy, what's that disgusting name of the boss in the Demon Ruins?
Ceaseless
Yeah,
discharge.
yeah, the ceaseless discharge. And Quelaag's sister, a similar spider woman, who is located in like the room behind her, but she's a firekeeper that actually lets you join her cult, as it were. Um, like if you make weapons from the ceaseless discharge soul and Quelaag's soul and read around and like find stuff around Blighttown, you realize that one of the Lord souls from that opening cutscene went to sort of the witch queen, and this witch and her children, when the first flame that was sustaining the world was starting to flicker, they tried to make an artificial flame using magic rituals to allow the world to be saved again. But the ritual went extremely bad. The town that they sort of lived in was completely warped, and I think Blight Town, the Demon Ruins, and Lost Izalith are the ruins of the city they used to live in. And the Blight Town, half of it was corrupted by poison, the Demon Ruins, half of it was corrupted by fire, and the witch became this bugs trapped in the bed of chaos. Two of her children became the two spider women in Blight Town, and her son became the rather grotesque ceaseless discharge boss. But you only can glean that by finding a lot of equipment, forging a lot of weird soul equipment, reading the descriptions, putting the puzzle pieces together, or if you're like me, you read two Wikipedia wiki articles and watched a video. But still, the fact that the seeds for all of this are there, and it's a dark, tragic story that has physical evidence in the game for it, it's really cool once you get it. Or maybe if you're playing the game for the second time, maybe you already know it, but now you're playing it and in the moment understanding it better. Now this might be unfair of me, but if you guys can try to transport yourself to the first time you played this game, like how aware of this lore were you playing? Let's say the Blight Town and Los Angeles sequences. Like how aware of all the story were you when you first played it, and maybe were you like me and you learned about it later and then sort of felt different about it afterwards? Because it's a really cool feeling when you sort of like get the lore and see it play out.
Yeah, I think I think it would be really hard for someone to like actually fully experience the story just playing through it. Like it almost requires that you
Oh
either
yeah, I don't know if it's possible. Yeah.
have outside stuff or people like kind of putting the pieces together for you. But I think that the like environmental storytelling is very strong, and that I think part of why it works so well is like you notice or see all these things when you're playing through the game and these environments, and there's little details or things that stand out to you and you're like, huh, like I wonder what that is. And then when you go to look for explanations later, then you already have experience with all the pieces, and then just having them fit together is like very satisfying. So I think that's part of why like there's so much appeal behind like lore explanation for the series, because
It's a whole cottage industry in itself. I know I mentioned it before, but there are YouTube documentary series, dedicated podcasts, probably a zillion online think pieces. It's not hard to find a good lore explainer for these games out there. But but the lore is also cool, so I get it.
Yeah, and I think too, it's like it's not just that like I think if it was all just in like item descriptions, or if it was all like really obscure or hidden through like the character quests that are kind of hard to complete on your first time through, then I think people just wouldn't like care as much about it. But I think the fact that people are so hungry for those explanations is kind of proof that the little things that they pepper throughout the environments and that NPCs will tell you and things like that are really compelling, and that's why so many people like want to get to the bottom of it.
Yeah, and it's also like the obtuseness like present on the game on like kind of like a mechanical level then just also translates to the way you experience the story. So there's a real like internal consistency to the way you like experience the game on all levels, which is super interesting. Like the first time I played it, I didn't even really know, like I hadn't heard about like the way that the story is supposed to work in the game. So I wasn't really reading item descriptions. I didn't know I was kind of expected to. I didn't know like the degree of story that's expressed through them. So I was just kind of like fumbling my way through the world, just enjoying the atmosphere, and like using like Demon Ruins as an example. Like I pulled up there, and like it's just like this massive, like almost agoraphobic open space with just like a bunch of like boss demons spread through it, and I'm like, oh, this area looks unfinished. But then like after you like do understand all the lore and like the basic kind of like explosive apocalypse that happened in that area, and the way like demons were unleashed from the chaos flame, you're just like, oh, that adds like so much more character to the way this environment is designed, even though it's like not, it's probably the worst environment like to explore from like a gameplay angle, but it does sort of like impart this new sense of like meaning onto the space you're walking through. That's just really interesting, and adds a lot of character to the game.
I mean, I know that this won't work for everyone because again, I am maybe the least concerned about spoilers of anyone that I know. Or let's say me and my sister are tied. She was a movie critic that worked for Entertainment Weekly and a couple other places for many years. But the way I experienced the game was I played it when I found something interesting or wanted to look something up, like even just where to find the Titanite large chunks or something. I would go and watch a video or read a wiki article to figure it out, and then I would get caught up and start reading more wiki articles. So I experienced a lot of the story by reading about the game and watching things about the game while I was in the middle of playing it, which is not an ideal way to experience it for most people. But like this wasn't true of every single area, but like going through, I mean, let's say Lost Izalith as an example again, going through there for the first time, I'm like, oh, this is the heart of where the witches were, and like sort of seeing it, having read about it ahead of time, was still very fun just because the like the environments are so thoughtfully designed and the lore is so cool. But we've been using that part of the game as an example. Gio or Ben or Dom, was there a part of the game where you sort of had that was just the perfect meeting of exploring and storytelling for you, that where it just sort of hit you how the game was presenting itself to you, and it was enhanced as a result? Maybe that's an awkward way to phrase the question, but jump around anywhere you want.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you go to New Londo after the water's been like drained out, and then you're there, and there's like all the bodies at the bottom that were under all of that. I thought that was like a really interesting, like, and kind of like freaky uh, piece of element of environmental storytelling, right? Because it's you finally get to this area, and if you had gone there earlier, like it's very, there's a curse enemy, ghost enemies or whatever, and it's very like foreboding. And then to get there and then see like the ramifications of what happened to them is just like, I think, very like impactful. So that's what comes to mind when I think of like the story and the exploration and gameplay kind of meeting.
Mm-hmm. For me, it was also that New Londo Ruins, but it was also the Duke's Archives, because like there's a part of the Duke's Archives where you encounter like these snake enemies, but they have like octopus heads or something, and you're like wondering what's up with them, and then like you can actually like make them do something if you like ring a bell in the building, and if you kill there's like two of them who aren't really hostile to you, and then when you kill them, like they drop like a miracle that's like given the Guinevere's maidens, and it's like oh, I understood, like, oh, From Software is trying to tell me something, and like I remembered that Seath the Scaleless has been like abducting maidens and doing experiments on them. So I was like, oh, so this is the result. And I found that really cool that it was not really like told to me, and it was not like it wasn't like delivered through exposition, but like through something like you just kind of encounter, and you kind of have to go out of your way to find that out. So I found that really cool.
Yeah, and as you're like killing like all those like more aggressive squid head people, like it's just like two of them are just kind of in the corner of the cell, and like as you approach them, you hear like just sounds of like women sobbing, even though they're just like these sitting squid things. And then you kill them and you get those miracles. So yeah, it's quite a good combination of like also how the game uses like sound to support like the storytelling, and then getting the miracles and reading those descriptions is just even more developing.
Yeah.
Yeah. For me, I think Dark Root. I mean, I agree with all the areas mentioned here, but I also think Dark Root Garden was such a such like a different vibe of exploration up to that point, with like the castles and everything was still like pretty well lit, and it was sort of standard sort of castle how do you call it, like landscapes at that point. But Darkroot Garden for me was such, like, first of all, like most of it is sealed off behind a crest that you have to get from Andre, and just exploring the area, finding the trees, um finding like the stone golems scattered around, which are also really friggin' hard to kill, by the way, and then finishing the area off with the Moonlight Butterfly boss fight, which isn't hard by any means, but it's like the OST, the whole vibe. It was just like, for me, it was, I think it was definitely one of the most like atmospheric and most engaging areas to explore and just like try and figure out like more about like what happened here. Why are these trees alive? Even I don't think is that even explained in the game. I'm not sure, but still, the whole like mystical feeling of Dark Souls, I feel, is really well like encapsulated in the Darkroot Gardens.
And also towards the back end of Darkroot Gardens, you fight you fight those forest hunter human-sized enemies. Or you have to navigate part of the woods with these these human-sized hunters that can be a little difficult if you're fighting more than one at a time. But then partway through that zone, you meet a talking cat, and if you join if you join the Covenant of the Forest Hunters, they stop attacking you, and you can get some bonuses and items for invading other players' spaces using the multiplayer functionality. But yeah, the Darkroot Garden, the talking cat, the trees, the open areas, including the basin at one end of the garden that also connects a bunch of other places in the game. Like I think there's a path to the um what's the Valley of Drakes? Yeah, there's a connection path to Valley of Drakes, which is these narrow bridges and cliffs that connect several areas together. And I think another one is a path that's like another shortcut to Blight Town or something. It's a very different feeling area that also enhances that feeling of interconnectedness that the game has. But maybe most importantly, one of my favorite boss fights from a story perspective is in Darkroot Garden. You fight Sif the wolf there, which is a wolf that's guarding the tomb of the knight Artorias, and it's I don't know if it's very clearly explained beforehand, but you can sort of you realize sort of afterwards that Artorias is again like a great hero of legend in this world, and Sif was his canine companion who's still guarding his tomb to this day. And you fight Sif, who wields Artorias' great sword in her mouth. It's not a challenging or particularly memorable boss fight mechanically, but after you defeat Sif and you get Artorias' ring from his grave, you realize that like just out of out of a feeling of loss or a feeling of guilt that she couldn't save him, Sif had just been loyally guarding that gravestone, like like the Hachiko statue in Shibuya in Tokyo or something. It was it's a boss fight that's sort of sad in retrospect, but you need Artorias' ring to get one of those Lord Souls. So it's yeah, there's no avoiding it.
Yeah, I kind of resent the game for making me kill Artorias' good girl.
Yeah, I didn't like that. I wish it was optional.
I mean that's definitely not optional, because otherwise, by setting foot in the deepest part of New Londo, you instantly die, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you need it. Yeah.
I wish you could just like
But one
pet Sif and then like she like give it to you.
You do get to save her in the DLC though. That's a little bit of redemption on the developer's
That's
part.
true.
yeah, we'll get there soon, but that leads me to one other thing that I think is interesting. You can do the Sieve boss fight and at least part of the New Londo ruins before finishing Anor Londo. So like you can do all that without the Lord Vessel and fast traveling. Although I don't necessarily recommend that because fast travel is a major breath of like a sigh of relief in this game. But um there's a serpent named Frampt that joins the Firelink Shrine. I think after you've rung one of the bells, either the one in the Undead Parish or the one in Blighttown, and he explains to you that someday one of the undeads gathering here is going to become the chosen undead and gather the souls into the Lord vessel and relight a flame that will revive the world again. But there's also a second serpent named, I think, Kata. And I didn't, or Koth maybe. I didn't actually meet Koth because I just sort of did what Frampt told me to do. But if you get deep into the New Londo ruins before getting the Lord Vessel, you can meet a second serpent who says that relighting the first flame is not necessarily the goal here. Because the way again, I only saw a video of this. I didn't actually meet Katha because I basically sided with Frampt. I think Kata was gone before I really had a chance to meet him.
Yeah.
But this
Yeah,
other
it's between one or the other. Yeah, you can't accept Framp's like thing, and it's like when you place the Lord Vessel, that's what
right.
blocks
So if
you out
I
of it. You have to bring the Lord Vessel to New Londo.
okay,
first.
but still, I mean, New Londo is considerably out of the way compared to Frampt and Anor Londo because like the story really directs you towards Anor Londo and Frampt is right there in your sort of home base area. Well, Koth is in this pretty out of the way deep underground zone that I didn't even really start to explore until after I got the Lord Vessel. So it's very out of the way. But Koth down there lets you join a new covenant, which are kind of like guilds in this game. But also um tell you that basically there was the I don't know, I could be getting the names of this wrong. There was the ancient age, which was the time where the dragons ruled everything, and then the after the four lords defeated the dragons, the world entered the fire age, where it was sort of sustained by the first flame, and there was a new level of prosperity. But we're in the end of the fire age now, and but Kath suggests that the best way to save the world is not to continue the fire age, but to let the flame go out and rule over the world in an age of darkness.
Well,
And
yeah, and it's not even like saving the world. He's like particularly like appealing to you as a human and saying that the gods have basically like oppressed humanity, and so like by ushering in the age of darkness, you like stop the cycle of Gwyn's age of fire and like let humanity truly prosper. But it's highly suspect, like the theory he's trying
it
to get you to
yeah
buy
it, it
into.
it's very suspect, but I think that Frampt's version of events is also suspect because
Oh
Frampt
yeah.
clearly supports the order of gods that ruled during the fire age or age of fire. I could be getting my nomenclature wrong, and again, a lot of this comes from me doing research outside of the text of the game. But the four souls that ended the Age of Dragons were the Sun God, the Sun King Gwyn, the Grave Lord Nito, the witch queen that I mentioned before, and then a fourth soul that was basically the ancestor of humanity, something called called the Pygmy, but that fourth soul really worried Gwyn because Gwyn didn't trust humanity. Like he saw humanity's like giant potential, but also felt threatened by it. sort of big Cronus swallowing his children kind of energy. So Gwyn placed a curse on the humans of Lordran that any now I could be wrong about this, and because I've done a lot of research, but not every, but I could be getting details wrong. That humans in Lordran are cursed to become undeads, and uh, in which case, if a human dies, they will be revived at a bonfire. But if they lose their sense of self, or lose their purpose, or give in to despair, then they become hollowed undeads, basically mindless ones that will just attack until they can't move anymore. And the humans that you meet in this game, like some of them are just trying to avoid hollowification. Like that knight that you talked to in the Firelink shrine for the first time is just sort of just really dejected. I think he might even be called like the sullen knight or the dejected knight or something. And after you get the Lord vessel, he's gone. But if you encounter an undead in that exact same armor in near the New Londo ruins later. So at some point the dejected knight just sort of gave in to despair and lost his sense of self. So, but that curse on humanity is because like Gwyn the Sun King felt threatened by the Lord soul shared between all of humanity. But Koth sees that Lord soul in you and says, "Hey, if you usher in a new age of darkness that will truly excise the world of the influence of those lords from before and be a true age for humans." But I mean, Koth is definitely being a suspect. This is I do not think he's trustworthy. But if you're able to encounter Koth, which is not a guarantee, before finding Frampt and giving the Lord vessel to him, that at least gives you a second or an idea for a second path, or at least talking about what ends up being the game's second ending. I didn't do any of that. I mean, I talked to Frampt. Frampt told me to go to Anor Londo and bring him the Lord vessel. I did exactly that, and just sort of continued the game, just sort of doing what I was told. But it's kind of cool that there's this hidden second way that gives you maybe a darker, more bleak ending that has, but with that's more pro-human and less pro-Lordran. I mean, am I getting any important details off, but yes or no to that? Like, what do we feel about the different story paths in this game?
Yeah, I feel like Koth is a conspiracy grifter, and Gwyn and his whole kingdom is like big government. And like, so when you go to Koth and he's just like telling you like the way you're being like exploited, basically, like there's a nice ring of truth to it, and like it's a theory you kind of like almost want to buy into, but then there's just like all of these clues about like the way that darkness like just corrupts and destroys, and even like humanoid type beings like just cannot thrive in it and become like kind of deformed, as we'll kind of see in the DLC. So yeah, that's my read on it, at least.
Yeah. I think I'm not sure if Gwyn is the cause of the curse because he himself goes hollow. I'm pretty sure. Like you fight a hollow fight Gwyn at the end, but I'm not really sure where the curse comes from. I think it's like part of the decay of the Age of Fire, and like it's essentially like inevitable that it's going to end, and it's like you either choose to prolong it or you choose to usher in a new age, whatever it is like Koth wants to do. And I think it's actually interesting because I mean, there's a lot of debate online, but like we don't really know if Frampt and Koth are really like opposed to each other, because at the end of the second ending, you kind of see like a whole bunch of primordial serpents like greet you and say pledge to serve you as the new king or something. And
But
yeah,
my read on it is that the primordial serpents are something older and and more knowledgeable than anything else in the world. But Frampt was sort of the one that supported Gwyn, and Koth was one that does not support Gwyn. and maybe craves an age of darkness. But the more you think about it, I think that the more I think about it, it probably is Koth propaganda that the idea that Gwyn created the curse, probably to turn you against Gwyn.
Yeah.
The likelier answer is that the first flame ignited by Gwyn, as it dwindles, it probably the curse just sort of appeared in the world as a symptom of the world dying, sort of.
Mhm.
I'm not even sure if lighting the flame excises the curse, but yeah, I mean we're jumping around a little bit, but the final boss of the game is a hollowed Gwyn, and and the choice at the end is: do you sacrifice your life to ignite the first flame and revive Lordran to a degree, or do you just walk past the first flame and allow it to go out, and you get that scene with the serpents all bowing to you?
Yeah.
I lit the flame. I just decided, you know what, I've been sort of playing this game normally, even though I've read a bunch of lore. This is just kind of what I want. If I replay the game in the future, I can go the dark route. But yeah. I mean, did anyone else decide to let the flame die this time around?
Oh, I did that this time. And you don't even need to meet Koth to do that. You can just kind of walk out. And you'd probably be really confused if you didn't know you could do that. But
Yeah.
yeah, you can actually do
You're
it.
like, what's with all these snakes?
Yeah.
Yeah, why are there dozens of Framps now?
Yeah.
Yeah, actually,
No, I
Sorry.
always. Oh, sorry.
oh,
go
so,
ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, like, it's really interesting because like Dark Souls 3 kind of picks up on the first ending where you kind of let the flame continue. So I really wonder what would have happened to the world if this after the second ending. I guess I'm very curious about that.
I mean, given what we know, I think it's pretty clear that the first ending was chosen because Dark Souls 3 takes place in Lordran long after the events of Dark Souls 1. So but maybe this gives you I haven't played Dark Souls 3. I don't know that game, but that either maybe gives you a second chance to end the cycle of suffering, or probably more accurately, just a new conflict has arisen in Lordran.
We'll see.
But this isn't a Dark Souls 3 podcast. I'm speculating on a game that's already been out for 8 years or something. So but yeah, like they at least give you a lot of lore to uncover and some interesting questions to address for the end game. But before we get there, is there anything else in the second half of the game that we really want to talk about? I mean, the Tomb of the Giants just sucks. It's dark. You need to either hold a skull lantern or wear a bright light on your head to properly get around.
I kind of like it.
I mean, I think it's cool until I'm confronted with actually having to navigate it, and at which points it is no longer cool and it's annoying and I want to be done with it. We talked about the invisible floors in the Crystal Cave. That's a cool effect. The Duke's Archives is a pretty interesting library dungeon where you have to manipulate some switches and staircases to get out of what you're doing in there. But we talked about humans going hollow and how there are some NPCs that you interact with in the game, like the Dejected Knight and Lautrec. But there's two we haven't really mentioned yet. Maybe I think we mentioned Solaire a little bit in the previous episode, but they have, at least in my feeling, two of the bigger optional quests in the game. I mean, but also Solaire is probably the most positively tinged character in this entire game. Like, I mean, I know he's a knight that worships the sun, but he is literally a ray of sunshine. I mean, we love Solaire. And are there any Solaire haters here? Because if so, this might be your last episode of Retro Encounter.
I mean, he's literally like my profile image on RPG Fan, so I'm quite a fan of Solaire. I just like even that first encounter with him where he's just like staring like boldly and warmly at the sun on that like balcony in the Undead Burg is just like that image is just like burnt into my head from the first time I play the game. And then you talk to him and he's just like so positive, and I love his like equipment descriptions where it's like first of all, his like armor is like, it looks like a child's drawing of like a sun on it. It's pretty great. But then like his sunlight straight sword, the item description is basically like that. Oh, despite its name, it's like it's basically like a long sword, and it plays like a long sword as well. So this idea that like Solaire is just like kind of like the perfect like player version of like the player character, where he just like has like all this faith in like Gwyn and the sun, and wants to like keep like that age going, and he just like basically is just purely like skilled. Like there's nothing like fancy about his equipment. He just like puts a lot of like heart into it. It's just like he's such a great character, and the fact that if you do his quest line um all the right way, and it's probably like maybe the most convoluted quest line to get done, that like you can
I would
actually
not. I yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
that you can actually like summon him for like the final fight, just like tells me that in a way he's like the game's true hero, which I think is really cool.
There's a couple ways to interpret him. He does have a covenant you can join again, which are kind of like guilds. That I think you either need you need a very high faith stat to join it, but that the faith requirement drops if you go into other people's worlds to help others. And it's a covenant that gives you some powerful miracle spells, but also gives you bonuses when you go into worlds to help others. So like I think the suggestion is Solaire is a visitor from his kingdom who's trying to obtain the first flame to either save Lordran or save his own kingdom. But he is someone that helps others first, and even his multiplayer mechanics communicate that. You can summon Solaire for a couple fights, not just the final fight. I brought him into that the dragon in the sewers level, the gaping maw dragon or something. I forget its name. I'm sorry. Again, I played this game a month ago.
I think it's
but
Gaping Dragon.
yeah, gaping dragon. That's it. But he's so positive. Um I only found out how his quest worked when after I encountered him. I think probably for for like the third time, like in Orlando. When he's by one of the bonfires partway through the castle. I was reading about him, and they're like, here's how you save Solaire, and here's what happens to kill Solaire, and I'm like, oh no, I want to save Solaire. What do I got to do? And what you have to do is the Spider Woman Firekeeper at the end of Blighttown, who's slightly hidden herself. So I think she's behind a hidden wall that you can like hear noises behind. You have to join her covenant, and then give her 30 humanity. And again, humanity is a replenishing resource that you get by, I think, killing between 10 and 20 enemies without dying. How it lets you build humanity slowly. You can also use humanity items to gain some instantly. You can spend humanity to kindle a bonfire and to give you more shots on your Estus flask. There's benefits for being human, but you lose all of your humanity when you're killed, but gain it back if you find your corpse in time. And you can even farm humanity because there's some enemies that drop humanity granting items. So it's not a completely zero sum game resource, but giving 30 humanity to the Spider Woman levels you up in her covenant by from level 1 to 2 or something, and that unlocks a secret door in the demon ruins. And if you go through that secret door, you can kill a parasite bug there that gives you a helmet that helps you light the way through the Tomb of Giants, and also gives you a shortcut to Lost Izalith. But the issue is if you get to Lost Izalith before without getting through that secret passage and killing that bug, then Solaire gets there before you, and he becomes possessed by the parasite bug, believing that this very, very brightly shining bug is the sun that he had been seeking, and which drives him mad, and you have to kill him in that circumstance. But if you find this very convoluted, not very well telegraphed way to find this secret passage and kill the bug before you get to Lost Izalith for the first time. Then you meet Solaire in a bonfire near there, but he's kind of dejected because I think he's sort of has come to the realization that that Gwyn is no longer the Sun King of legend, that Lordran's dying and he might not be able to find the sun he needs ever. So like it ends with Solaire being sad if you save his life, but he is available for that final boss fight as a summon, and which just communicates just to how much of a good person and Solaire is, that wants to be there for you, the hero that inadvertently saved him. So again, it's very convoluted, but you're damn right I wanted to do it. So I farmed humanity for 40 minutes or something by killing rats in the sewer, and then I saved him. But it's just weird, the odd step you have to do to get through there. But I never would have found it on my own. I found it by specifically accidentally, like seeing how do I save Solaire and then reading about it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the great parts about Dark Souls as well, which has been mentioned a lot previously as well. It's that it really feels like the world doesn't revolve around you as much as you are like the prophesized, the chosen undead who will save Lordran. Like NPCs really do have their own agendas, and they will go through with them regardless of like whatever you're doing. So like they won't be around Firelink forever as like a vendor for spells or whatever. And like just like the act of them moving to different areas, and then like if you talk to them, they'll like tell you about like what they've been doing till that point. I feel that just lends itself so well to the environmental storytelling and like the natural world building of Dark Souls. And like it really also like, at least for me, it really furthered my curiosity and like the characters themselves, but also like, for instance, like Big Hat Logan. He's like a he's like a very famous mage who eventually goes crazy in the Duke's archives, I believe. And like he's in like a cage in Sen's Fortress, and like after you free him, he'll be in like Firelink Shrine for a bit. But he's also on like a quest to find like I think what was like the perfect sorceries that Seath was researching, and just like stuff like that, and like seeing stuff like that and experiencing stuff like that, and even missing stuff like that, and like eventually coming back and maybe going through it again with a wiki. Like I feel that just lends itself so well to how alive the world feels in Dark Souls.
There's so many hidden things and so many obscurely hidden things. Like there's a whole area that we've mentioned a couple times, the Great Hollow, that is that's behind a hidden wall in a treasure chest at one end, at like a sort of out of the way corner of Blighttown. That's a giant path, like a giant tree trunk path down, leading to a new zone called Ash Lake. It's extremely hard to find that without some kind of guidance. But if you have multiplayer turned on, there's definitely a lot of player messages leading you to the Great Hollow, possibly warning you about it. Like we mentioned, at least one of us, I forget who, I'm sorry, getting stuck in the Great Hollow without the Lord Vessel, and then having a very difficult time navigating your way back up. But like this is and going into the multiplayer stuff again, if you're playing online, which I didn't for the most part, like seeing the player hints and messages maybe will guide you towards some of this very obscurely hidden content. But if you're not playing that way, then maybe you play the game a little clumsily at first. You let Solaire die. You don't meet many of these NPCs or find many of these areas. But after you beat the game, I think this is true of most From Software fantasy RPGs. You're immediately dropped into a new game plus, and maybe you'll do some more research and more reading and find out things you missed, and then experience the game a new way the next time. And there's no wrong way to play these. I'm not saying you should do the research ahead like I mostly did, or you should experience it cold once and then more deliberately reading ahead later. But the fact that it's all there for you is just so cool. And on top of it, the action's fun. The boss fights are mostly really good. Some examples like Bed of Chaos notwithstanding. I didn't think the Nito boss fight was great either. I mean, he's basically just a big hunchback skeleton that yells at you. Uh, I like navigating the Tomb of the Giants was way harder than fighting Nito for me personally. But he also was the last of the Lord Souls that I challenged, so I probably was a little over leveled. But before we get into a couple more shenanigans involving Gwendolyn and Priscilla that I would like to talk to you before we wrap, is there any part of this game, whether it's story or gameplay or even a boss fight or your personal build related, that we want to bring up? Because I mean, I played through once I had gotten to Honor Londo, I sort of settled on the Great Scythe and and various medium shields. For a while, it was the Grass Crest shield, then it was the Silver Knight shield, and then by the end of the game, it was the I had moved on to the Great Shield of Artorias. I was mostly a Scythe and Shield Black Knight for the entire second half of the game. But is there anything we want to talk about before we move on to Gwendolyn, Priscilla, and DLC?
I mean, I guess one thing I'll bring up that's always stood out to me as one of my favorite parts of the game is just like the sound design, and like all of the Soul series has like really like detailed sound design that uses like sound effects and just like ambience to give like character to like different environments or like different enemies. But there's something about the like jankiness of the mixing in the sound design in Demon Souls and Dark Souls in particular. And I actually looked this up. I didn't realize that the sound director for those two games, Yuji Takenouchi, actually didn't do the sound design for later games, which is a lot more like polished and professionally done, I think. But there's like that weirdness in the mixing where like ambience is just like really kind of like subtle in the background, but then like all like the sounds of like footsteps or like enemy movements are like super forward in the mix, that I think like from the beginning like was a big part of the game's appeal to me, and like kind of gave it this like surreal, almost like mystical character to the world. So yeah, I just like really appreciate the sound design in this game, and I think like even though like environments don't get like music the way like they do in like a lot of other RPGs, just like the ambience you get like kind of does the same work as like a good song does in like another RPG that like characterizes the environment for you. Like I remember walking into like Darkroot Garden for the first time and just like being washed over with like kind of the rushing of wind and like crickets and things like that like really made a strong impression on me. So yeah, that's just mine.
All right. Well, I mean, I guess I've teased it a little bit. There's a couple optional things in the Anor Londo area that just made it, which is again my favorite zone in the game by a significant margin. That just made it much cooler for me. There's this whole like world within a world. If you go into the chapel at the side of Anor Londo, there's a bunch of these white I forget what they're called. Are they painting knights? Or painted they're almost ninja like, these sort of white robed agile guards in this chapel with a painting at one end, a huge painting that takes up most of the wall. And if you approach the painting, you accidentally get drawn into it, like you're playing Mario 64 or Castlevania Portrait of Ruin, which takes you to sort of the game's ice level, an abandoned fort called the Painted World of Ariamis. And the story around here is really, really heartbreaking. It looks like that Gwyn had tried to create a human dragon hybrid, with possibly with Seath, the only dragon that I should say the dragon that betrayed his own species to side with Gwyn, possibly with Seath's DNA, possibly with something else, but basically this land inside of a painting is the prison for a half dragon, half human named Priscilla, who is sort of a failed magic experiment of sorts. Priscilla had a set of caretakers in this painted world that I think have since passed away. So the area is inhabited mostly by undead. And if you navigate the area, which has undead and harpies and a bunch of and some keys and doors to figure out, it's a cool area to explore. There's also a rather unfortunate mini catacomb full of wheel skeletons that I didn't care for, frankly. If you get to her chamber at the end, she lets you exit because there's no way to leave the painted world under normal circumstances. Or you can attack her to activate her as a boss fight. She's invisible to the eye. You have to watch her footprints in the ground or the snow to figure out where she is. And she can counterattack with scythe moves that inflict a lot of bleed damage. I died to her a couple times before figuring out when to defend better. Uh, but it's a kind of a sad area when you sort of understand the story happening around you, because this is just a person whose very existence is suffering, and who wants nothing more than to be left alone. But you're sort of just like going into her prison unannounced, and I don't know, it's kind of not as bad as the Thief fight, but it's sort of tinged with tragedy in a way. But I thought it was a cool area to check out for the first time. Any thoughts on the Painted World?
I definitely agree that it is visually very cool, but personally I found it to be a bit exasperating gameplay wise, because I think it's like the hollows there, they can like puke on you, and that will inflict toxic actually instead of poison. And toxic is like a much higher damage version of poison basically, and those enemies are like littered all over the map. And the raven like harpies, like the harpies with like the raven heads, they're also very deadly and will pretty much three shot you unless you go in with like very fully leveled gear. So I thought it was a very tough gauntlet, and as you mentioned before, the basement full of bone wheels is the stuff of nightmares, and it is
Oh my God.
you'll probably fall down there accidentally while you're playing. So like your death, like you're not only are you disoriented from the fall, it's like you have to deal with like five bone wheels aggroing on you at the same time as well.
I
So
I, I don't
I
think
thought
I
it was
fell that. I don't think I fell down accidentally, but I definitely climbed in there through a well, because RPGs
yeah.
have taught me to search every well that I see.
Oh yeah,
Um,
that might be it. Yeah, but I just remember being like, okay, like I hit the floor, and then by the time I turn around, I see like three bone wheels charging me. I'm like, okay, I guess I'll die then. And yeah, I just wanted gameplay wise to be a bit exasperating, but I definitely agree that visually it's a super cool area.
Yeah. For me, some details I like were like kind of the callbacks to Demon Souls. Like there were a few I saw, like the phalanx. They kind of brought it back, but you know,
yeah, the slime hoplite enemies
yeah.
that all gather to one. That's the first boss of Demon Souls, right?
And then there was the old monk king, forget his name, old monk, and then but like here he's like a King Jeremiah, and like he has the same weird turban thing, and like I don't know, I was like, oh, this is nice, kind of nostalgic, and yeah, it's generally a very interesting world that I'm curious what some of the stuff means, like what like when there's like a big decaying dragon on the bridge towards the end, and then if you kill it, there's like another claw on the bridge, and I'm not sure what that is. Is it like another dragon? But you can't really get past it. And yeah, I just have there's like a whole bunch of unanswered questions about that world. And so yeah, I found it really interesting. It's one of my favorite worlds, even though I like Dom, I found it really annoying how the hollows can give you toxic. It's yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, I forgot about those toxic inflicting undeads. But I think I don't know, I'd gotten good enough at avoiding them by the end that they didn't bother me as much. I also went through I think that this is a very easy place to farm experience, because if you get to a level where you can one or two shot the phalanx slimes, you can get 8,000 souls right next to a bonfire in about 30 seconds.
Oh,
And if you wear rings that increase your souls drops, that number can go much higher. So towards the end of the game, when I was trying to build some equipment that cost tens of thousands of souls. That's where I went to get it, and one sort of running R1 on my great scythe could one shot maybe a couple slimes at once. So it's that's the kind of strategy this game has you learn when it really gets its hooks into you.
Well, having that leveling hack is like actually super nice for the painted world because you're stuck there, right? Until you beat Priscilla. So if you
Correct, yeah.
somehow end up going there like too early, like say you go back to the Undead Asylum, get the doll, and like go there before you even beat Ornstein and Smough, like that's
right.
going to be so hard.
You can't even get in there until you get the doll until you like jump into the Raven's Nest and go back to the asylum. I forgot. You're right.
Yeah. It's like super convoluted just to get to that level.
And there's like 3 Black Knights on the way to the doll or something.
Yeah, it's not easy once you get back to that asylum. But yeah, I mean, like it's good that they have like that leveling failsafe for anybody who did happen to screw themselves over by getting there too early.
I was already like figuring out where to like how to fight the Lord Souls bosses when I did the Painted World. So I got there at a manageable level, but Priscilla did take me a couple tries just because I don't know, like I bled out a few times in a row. But the other thing in Anor Londo that really struck me as something that would be hard to do without preparation, but it's very, very cool when you pull it off, is the entire quest line involving Gwendolyn. You can meet Gwendolyn pretty early. I think you have to find the Dark Moon ring in the catacombs, which is in a hidden area in the catacombs. Not far from the from that. Who was that sad boss with the 3 masks?
Pinwheel,
that's right. Yeah, it's not far from the Pinwheel boss. And if you go take the Dark Moon ring to a sort of lower level of Anor Londo underneath the castle, which has a bonfire there. It's not a very hard place to find. Then if you're wearing the ring when you go down there, and there's plenty of player messages to tell you what to do. Then a giant statue disappears, exposing a new corridor, and that lets you join a new covenant. That's sort of like the secret society behind Anor Londo that takes care of the enemies of Anor Londo behind the scenes, and it's led by Gwendolyn, who is King Gwyn's son and the younger brother of Guinevere, the giant lady at the top of the castle. So that's cool, and that covenant I think gets you bonuses for invading other people's worlds, similar to the Forest Hunters, and that's neat. But if you take a few extra steps, then things get very weird. I mean, the easiest way to do this, there's probably a couple ways to do it. I think you can challenge Gwendolyn directly, or you can find clues to this effect. But the easiest thing to do is to just use a range attack, a spell or an arrow, probably, and shoot Guinevere, the goddess at the top of Anor Londo. If you do that, she instantly vanishes. That's not the real Guinevere. That Guinevere was an illusion maintained by Gwendolyn, because the truth of the matter is that all of the gods abandoned Anor Londo a long time ago, possibly centuries earlier, and including Guinevere's older brother that sided with the dragons and sort of became was disowned by Gwyn. Gwyn himself retreated to where the first flame is and became hollow, which we alluded to before. And Gwendolyn has been sort of maintaining this facade of control. It's like, no, the gods of this world are still in power here. Everything's fine. But if you shoot the Guinevere illusion, the world darkens. The sun doesn't reach Anor Londo anymore, and most of the knights that you encounter across the game are now gone. Really, most of those knights were illusions, and just a handful of Gwendolyn's most trusted knights are replace them. The Firekeeper near the beginning of Anor Londo is still there. She's one of Gwendolyn's agents, but yeah, it sort of all crumbles around you, and then you can fight Gwendolyn in the same corridor where you meet him. The boss fight's a little annoying. You have to sort of like follow him down an endless corridor dodge or block his attacks, getting like one hit in, and then he teleports further down. It's a little repetitive, but it's not a terrible boss fight, I guess. But if you defeat Gwendolyn, forge some of his armor, read some more clues, read some more item descriptions, and it reveals like a family story that's way more screwed up than even I assumed going in. Because Gwendolyn was born with sort of moon powers instead of sun powers, moon powers are considered inferior and feminine. So Gwendolyn, who is biologically male, was raised as a woman and has some major issues with with gender identity and abuse from Gwyn himself, and it's just a very sad, strange story that's a little bit too much like the B horror movie Sleepaway Camp for my liking. If you know, you know. But yeah, that was. I mean, I thought when I did not encounter this organically. I read about it and then used the very end of the game when I was basically ready to fight Gwyn to darken Anor Londo. I also used this opportunity to kill both the both the firekeeper in Anor Londo and the Spider Woman in Blighttown to pump up my Estus flask a little bit. So I killed a couple extra firekeepers, perhaps unnecessarily just for the end game. But yeah, well, what do we think about the Anor Londo's dark secret?
Yeah, I love thinking of the first player that was just like got to Guinevere, decided to screw around and just like shot an arrow at her, and then like watched the sun just disappear and Anor Londo sink into darkness. Because I mean, like the first thing you see when you get to Anor Londo is just like the power of the sun just like projecting directly on the camera. You get like a lens flare kind of effect, and it's just like it makes that city look so like impressive and like a beacon of hope compared to like everything you've seen before. So to have that all like just like vanish, like that's another reason that it makes Cotswold Conspiracy a little more appealing to buy into, because like everybody is getting bamboozled by Gwyn and the gods.
I mean, it's an amazing sort of symptom of this world being dying and abandoned and derelict. But it's, I mean, I thought it was so cool. Like I'm glad I waited till the end to do it, because I mean I still like the shiny version of Honor Orlando, but yeah, it's cool as hell. Well, anyway, sort of that's how my end game went. I sort of I got the Lord Souls. I did most of what I wanted to do. I killed two firekeepers to make my Estus flask stronger. But then I decided to go to the DLC, and this Artorias of the Abyss DLC landed I think a little less than a year after the game came out. Um, in a very fun version of subversive marketing. Basically, I think my understanding is people that had paid for the DLC, or if you had the PC version or the later remastered version, it automatically came with the DLC. You had to like fight a crystal golem in a really remote part of the Darkroot Basin, then speak to the mysterious woman that appears, then go back all the way to the Duke's archives and kill the crystal golem that's already there, like even in the unpatched version of the game. Then after you defeat that crystal golem, you get an item. And if you go back to where the lady in the lake was with that first crystal golem, you get drawn and dragged into a portal leading to the DLC zone, which is a very picturesque sort of forest and shrine, and then sort of I would say sort of like a city complex that goes vertically down. There's a couple boss fights on the way, and we'll talk about those. But what I think becomes clear is that this was a time portal to the past, where you're confronting sort of the aftermath of the famous Artorias, and Artorias was a knight of Gwyn that was like Gwyn's finest soldier, who braved the abyss to challenge it and save the I think save the princess of a neighboring nation or something.
Yeah, so Ulasil is the region that you go to in the
Right.
past, and Ulasil was the first place that was being attacked by the Abyss. So the Abyss is already in Lordran at the time that going around, and that's why New Londo was flooded to sequester the abyss, with the four kings and everything. But originally, the source of the abyss was in Ulasil, and so Gwyn sent his four knights, or I guess it was just three of them, because I think uh, Ornstein is one of them. But there's also Gouge, and then Artorias, and then Sieran, and those three are all in this DLC. So he sent them there to like basically figure out what's going on and push back the abyss.
Right. And we mentioned this earlier, but sort of going into the abyss, like we even encounter Sif, Artorias's wolf friend, and we can save her from what appears to be a barrier given by present like a barrier established by Artorias himself to save her.
Yeah, he left his great shield because he was injured in the battle with Manus, so
Right.
he can't use it anymore. So he left it behind to protect Sif.
Yeah, and I picked up that great shield and used it against Manus because it has by far the best magic reduction of any shield I had available. And Manus has a big magic attack that killed me very quickly the first time I fought him. But anyway, the run of bosses here. There's the Sanctuary Guardian at the beginning. Then around halfway through, you fight you fight Artorias of the Abyss, who's again this a humanoid knight that's been corrupted by the darkness of the Abyss. You can optionally fight a giant dragon called Calamite, and then at the end of the Abyss zone, there's a Manus, the sort of dark god of the Abyss. And I mean, top to bottom, I think those are four of probably the best 8 fights in the whole game. Like they're intense and fast and awesome. Artorias is probably my favorite boss fight other than Ornstein and Smaug. Those are 1A and 1B. And I just had a lot of fun with this DLC zone because it really felt like it felt beautiful and crafted, kind of like the best parts of the first half of Dark Souls. And it was a joy to explore and do these cool boss fights. But because I waited till the very end game to do it, I was pretty well kitted out, and my build was sort of established by then. So any souls I got were just went straight to vitality. But yeah, I mean, I thought this DLC was great, and I find it very, very hilarious that it was sneakily put into the game. And my understanding is the community lost their damn minds for about 48 hours before it was discovered and then widely spread around how to access it.
So it's actually, they said ahead of time how to access it. That's it. It's interesting. So that was that's kind of a myth that's propagated in the community.
So it's an apocryphal story that I encountered.
Yeah. There's I forget which Souls YouTuber did a video about it, but one of them recently did a video and they went back and looked at all the press releases and all that, and they just told you how to access it. Bandai Namco did at the time it came out because they knew nobody's gonna just figure that out on their own.
That's a little disappointing, but probably the best in the long run, because I imagine there could have been a negative backlash, but I mean that doesn't diminish how good the DLC is. Again, these are I think 4 of the better boss fights in the game, and it allows you to experience part of the Artorias story, which is one of the cooler background pieces to Dark Souls lore. I loved it, but I was playing the remastered version of the game, so I didn't have to bend over backwards to play it, but yeah, it's great.
Yeah, one other thing too, lore wise, in this DLC is that so if you notice, there's, especially when you're going down towards Manus and the more abyss corrupted areas of the DLC, there's these enemies that are basically physical sentient representations of the humanity that you are always consuming, the humanity items. And so there is kind of like we were talking about earlier with Iskoth, trying to trick you in how, is that really the evil path or not? But it's interesting that the abyss and the creatures, some of the creatures of the abyss are these humanity creatures. So it's almost the humanity is tied to the abyss in some way. And so, it's kind of implying something about like the humanity that you're using, but also like humanity's relationship to the abyss and the darkness versus the gods and the age of fire and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I did the DLC is the reason why I never take why I never do Darkstalker Koth's route anymore, because Darkstalker Koth pretty much the entire reason the Abyss is going buck wild in Ulasil is because Koth convinced the people of Ulasil to dig up Manus's grave
Mm-hmm.
and steal the pendant, I think. And Manus he's a primeval man who had a very powerful shard of humanity. And by digging up his grave, they basically reawakened him, and Manus's humanity ended up becoming like the abyss of that time. So Koth pretty much he screwed up an entire country just to see what happens, really, by digging up the grave. So that's why I never take Koth's route anymore, because I just can't, honestly. He's also the reason the New Launder is underwater, because he tempted the Four Kings with life drain, which is like a forbidden power, I think, back then. And because of that, they eventually ended up falling to the corruption of the abyss, which is why New Launder is flooded at the start of the game. So yeah, lots of interesting lore tidbits there.
Yeah. For me, sorry, like I wanted to go back to Artorias, because my my thought when I was fighting him was like, oh, he kind of moves like he's kind of like the first boss to kind of move like this. I don't like other bosses like kind of have they're the way you read their attacks is like a lot simpler in the game, but Artorias is the first one to like kind of have a more interesting move set that kind of became the template for how future games enemies would kind of work. And
Yeah, Artorias and Manus feel like Bloodborne bosses back that went back in time into Dark Souls 1.
yeah,
They just move with more. They move with more energy, and they're much faster. Their big attacks are all telegraphed, but they're just big and fast. And I mean, like Ornstein and Smough, they'll sort of like take turns attacking and move in a very linear but still powerful way. Like they like circle you, they stalk you, and their attacks will be more unexpected and flashier. It feels like a later series boss.
Yeah, the modern like FromSoft boss template, it really comes out of this DLC. Like you can really see like the connection between like Artorias and Manus, and then a lot of the like more famous or memorable fights in like Dark Souls 3, even Dark Souls 2 to some extent, Bloodborne, and even Elden Ring. The very aggressive move sets, the like complex combo strings. I think a lot of the bosses in Demon Souls and then in base game Dark Souls are a lot more like it's a big enemy and they do like maybe one or two attacks with like a lot of wind up, and they're not as fast, and it's more like traditional, I guess you would say, boss design. And these bosses are much more like a duel between you and like a slightly larger and slightly more powerful foe. And I think that's just like how they would design bosses from here on out.
Yeah, it's also just a huge step forward in like characterization of bosses like through animation, because like like Ornstein and Smough are like, that's a great boss, but like their attacks just like feel very rigid and video gamey. But like the way Artorias moves, like you can like feel that like corruption and pain that like he's experiencing from the abyss, like just in the way like he moves around and does his attacks. And that's what the series like really started to excel at, starting with Bloodborne, is just like giving a sense of like who the boss is through like the detail in the animation.
I mean, no arguments here. These boss fights are great and are a portent for what the series boss fights would be like later on. And I don't think any of us are complaining. It's super good. But I mean, just to put a bow on it, Dark Souls 1 is super good. Like it like on the surface, it's this extremely cool action RPG that has this interconnected setting and good boss fights and a lot of threat that you can conquer with patience and persistence. But this minimalist story that gives way into extraordinarily deep and cool lore. I mean, I had been putting off playing this game for well over a decade, but I'm so glad I finally did. I just wish that maybe it didn't have such a nasty reputation for difficulty, because I know there's people in RPG fan that haven't played these games because of that reputation, and I'm like, yeah, these are hard, but it's not it's not like NES Ninja Turtles hard. It's a doable hard, and I was so impressed. This game is great. Do we have any other final comments before we move on to housekeeping?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, for me, as someone who started with the PS3 version and with this most recent playthrough, I played remastered. 60 FPS makes a big difference. I can't say I'm a big fan of some of the lighting changes, though. I think a lot of aura was lost. But if remastered is your first time playing it, I think you wouldn't really mind, and it's totally fine. I would recommend like someone maybe pick up Prepare to Die edition on PC or something, because I don't know, the way the lighting works there, little subtle changes to the aesthetic are they're great. Like I kind of prefer them. So yeah, but no matter what version you play, Dark Souls is really one of the best games of all time. I would say, and really well worth experiencing if you could let go of like your fear of souls, or like, if you think it's not. Dark Souls kind of helps you out. It's a fair game, I would say. So yeah, I would heartily recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, you can also play the 360 version is backwards compatible if you have an Xbox. So
Yeah.
that version will retain the like art design and everything of the original. It's not at 60 frames per second, but I think it does.
The much more pukey greens of the original version.
Yeah, and it'll I think it has more like steady performance, so you don't get as much frame drops in like Bite Town and stuff like that. So it's like, you know, like a idealized version of the original version if you don't like the remastered version.
I remember Miyazaki even saying that like he meant for his games to be played in 30 FPS.
Oh my god.
So if you
Well,
want
they
to
do-
stay
yeah.
true to Miyazaki's vision, that's the way to do it.
Yeah, I mean they did tie like game logic to frame rate, so that's probably part of what he means with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, because like your weapons degrade at like, if you run it in 60 FPS, they degrade at like twice the rate and stuff like that. But there are fixes for that on PC, and then obviously the remastered version fixes that stuff too.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Dark Souls is like it's punishing in a sense, but I think it sort of just lends itself, like the difficulty, I think just is sort of um just trying to impress, like how should I say this, like trying to make the world feel as real as possible. For instance, like when like the Black Knight, not the Black Knight, like the big chunky knight in the Undead Parish, when he like clobbers me with his mace, like I kind of expect, like it doesn't surprise me when I see like 80% of my health bar fly off when he like hits me with a mace there, or when maybe I get careless and I get cornered by like three undead and they like all end up skewering me with their spears. But like if you just slow down and you realize that the enemies can basically like do as much damage as you do, and you're just not given as many guardrails perhaps as other games. Like Dark Souls is like a pretty, like a more than doable game, and especially like if you go into some of the like you go into some like the builds with shields or with like ranged magic, it becomes like I think it becomes like even a fairly easy game to play, honestly, because something like magic in this game is really overpowered for most bosses, and like there are like difficulty sliders, but they're like in game, and like they're dependent on like maybe the build choices you go with or how you decide to spec out your character in the early game. So yeah, I say it's like I wouldn't say it's particularly more difficult than a lot of other games out there. It's just that the options to tune the difficulty are just present in the game rather than in like an options menu.
Yeah, the game's hard, but I mean, it really does reward patience and effort. Because I mean, you can figure out a build that works and often find exactly the item you need just by exploring a little bit further. But I mean,
Mhm.
it has this reputation for being ultra hard. I mean, the Dark Souls of blank was practically a meme for several years that we even propagated on RPG fan podcasts. Uh, and that and the community around it has become this sort of like a mix of a genuinely good community with some nasty get good toxicity that I don't think helped anything. So I don't want to meditate too much on like on how hard these games, how necessary it is that these games be hard, because I think the difficulty is real, but it's not the kind of difficulty that should prevent people from playing the game. Like I think this game is so cool and really one of the best RPGs of its specific era that it's unless you truly cannot handle a 3D action RPG, then I strongly recommend it. This game is just a top to bottom. This game's great. I recommend it. If you are the kind of person that would listen to 3 hours of podcasts about Dark Souls without having played it. But maybe I spent quite a long time playing Dark Souls in mostly in the month of June. I think I should maybe follow up with a different kind of dark fantasy RPG. Right now I'm in the middle of playing Dragon Age Inquisition, and that's because we're doing 2 episodes on Dragon Age Inquisition in August. I am way too deep into that game, and I'm very excited to talk about it in a couple of weeks, possibly with some present company as well. But also coming to Retro Encounter in August, we're doing 1 episode on Undertale next week. Our first Undertale episode from a few years ago had some technical issues, and there's also several years of perspective and new staff excited to talk about, or I should say, new post 2020 staff excited to talk about it. So we're doing a revisit on Undertale next week, and also 1 episode about Final Fantasy games that I'm not exactly going to reveal the true nature of right now, and 1 episode on DLC in which From Software games might make multiple appearances. So that's the future of Retro Encounter. But Retro Encounter is not the only podcast on RPGFan.com. There's also Random Encounter every 2 weeks about what games we're playing, and Rhythm Encounter about every other 2 weeks about RPG music. You can support RPG Fan by listening to our podcasts, emailing retro@rpgfan.com, following RPG Fan on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube, Discord, a whole bunch of places. There's even a shop, rpgfan.com/shop, which has 2 storefronts, one hosted by TeePublic, where you can get apparel and accessories like coffee mugs and phone cases, and another hosted by Hyperplay RPG, where you can buy the RPG Fan Reviews compilation, a 300-page tome containing single-page reviews from all of RPG Fan's history. And I mentioned those other podcasts. You can review any podcast on the RPG Fan Podcast Network, on Apple Podcasts or YouTube or Spotify, by clicking like buttons, subscribing, 5 stars out of 5. You know the deal. Please give us feedback in any way you choose. But yeah, that was a big rambling into the housekeeping portion of the podcast, frankly, because I'm just starting to fade a little bit. But I mean, Dark Souls has a reputation for being an ordeal, but I had so much fun with it and was so excited to talk about it that this podcast was not an ordeal for me at all, at least not mentally or emotionally. So thank you so much, Aleks, Ben, Gio, and Dom for agreeing to take part in these episodes. Yeah, Dark Souls is great. How about it?
It sure is.
One of the best.
Best one.
Yeah, I think it might be the best one. Although I have very strong feelings about Dark Souls 2. So it's one of those for me.
I mean, I've only played 3 From Souls games. I think Bloodborne is my favorite between Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and Demon Souls. But I'm perfectly. I think I probably will end up replaying at least a couple of these because they're that good. Although I am looking real hard at my copies of Dark Souls 2 and 3 right now and wondering which one's next. But is there a recommendation, or should we keep moving on?
No, sorry. I wanted to say that I want to correct myself because I forgot about Bloodborne. But yeah, that's my favorite too. I'm with you, Sollosi. So
And I mean, I've heard that there's this little indie darling Elden Ring that a lot of people like. Maybe that one is high on people's lists as well. But if you want to share with us your Souls opinions, or tell me about your Dragon Age build, or which Final Fantasy game is the best, whatever you want, you should reach out to us as individuals and not just as a podcast. Let's tell the listeners how to find us, the panelists, starting with you, Dom.
Oh, you can ping me on Discord on the RPG fan server as @dhcanny.
Now, Ben.
You can email me at benloganlove@gmail.com.
Now, Gio.
yeah, you can email me at geo@rpgfan.com, or you can reach out through Discord. I go by at 10bstar, TENBI star.
Now, Aleks.
You can email me at alexfraniczek@gmail.com.
And listeners, maybe you've heard me say this upwards of 200 times, but you can find me online in a couple places pretty easily. I am at EvoGrapherDogs on Blue Sky, Instagram, and RPG Fans Discord. I am no longer on a certain bird site, and I thank God for that every day. But also, I mean, we don't know what the game after Shadow of the Erdtree is, do we? Well, we'll see what Tokyo Game Show can bring. Thank God for Hidetaka Miyazaki. Thank you, good night, and good luck.